guys, and we all eventually wound up in service. And I was in the medics, as I said. It's a longer story than just that, but I wound up in the medics in the Army. Dave, my next youngest brother, was a bombardier navigator. They called him a Mickey operator. The Mickey was the most sophisticated of the Bob sightings that had just come out at that time. And so he had the enviable, unenviable job as a lead crew bombardier. At the beginning of the war, the bombardiers were just, each plane had its own bombardier, and the bombs were taking out schools instead of ball bearing factories. And so in order to correct that, they made the bomb sightings much more correct, and they trained certain crews, and they became they were called Mickey operators, or lead crew operators. So my brother Dave was a lead crew operator, and what that was, that they led the formation, and all the other bombardiers read their directions from his readings, okay? And it corrected much. They hit the ball bearing plants after that much more likely. But anyway, Dave was doing that. He was on a bombing raid over Berlin and was shot down. And it was wintertime, and he parachuted down. And when he landed with his foot on a rock, and he broke the bones in his foot. And he was a German prisoner of war at that time, because as I said, over Berlin. And so he was in a German prison camp, prison hospital actually, and there was a Polish orthopedic surgeon there that was also a prisoner, and he got enough paper mache or stuff to make a cast for my brother's foot. And so Dave, he was in that hospital, and he was there until one of General Patton's shots up through the middle of Germany, when he finally broke loose and went up through, and Dave was released by one of Patton's tank columns. But he was in this hospital in Germany, and in the hospital they noticed that all of the German people, or the military end of that hospital, they were all disappearing, because the word was that Patton was on his way up, and he's just down the next county or something like that. So these tank columns of Patton's literally went right up through the center of Germany, and they were on their way. So the people in the hospital, the staff, deserted the hospital. And my brother and the other prisoners of war there could hear our tanks coming, clanking, clanking, clanking. And Dave told me that the hospital driveway was like this. The main road that the tanks were on was like this. And all the prisoners that could went over to the windows of the hospital and looked down to see this Patton's tank column coming. And it came in and parked in the middle of that driveway, and the guys, the prisoners that could do it, were all looking out the windows down there, and they were prisoners, not just English, American rather, but all of the Allied forces. They were all officers. Dave was an officer, and he was in with officers, and they were all watching intently as the tank came in, and they were being quiet, and the tank hood, what do you call it, the turret, opened up. And the guy stepped up and looked up and saw all those GIs and other prisoners up there, and he hollered, and this is the gospel truth, he hollered out, "Anybody up there from Rochester, New York?" Okay? Now, to make it a little more personal, if you think of Sibley's, across the street from Sibley's on Clinton, there was an ice cream store, Critics. Does that ring a bell with anybody? Oh, yeah. Anyway, okay. And the driver of that tank was one of the sons of the Critic family. So I've been And that story gets longer and longer, of course. But anyway, that was an edge. Anybody up there from Rochester, New York?
So then the phone rang.
Pardon?
Then the phone rang.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Yeah, the rest of that story. I was in the hospital. I was working in the hospital, okay? And when I started, when Dave and I used to meet in London, if we could arrange our time, if he was between bombing raids of Germany, and I could get him maybe a couple of days off, he was stationed in England, obviously, and so was I, so we would arrange to meet in London. And we did that, and we had it. We would go down to Piccadilly Circus in the center of London and wander around, and we always went to a particular restaurant there called the Trocadero. I remember the name of it. I don't know if that rings a bell with you or not, but in any event, it was a fashionable. The GIs populated the place anyway. But anyway, when all that was going on, and I would meet with Dave. Dave was the first lieutenant, but I was a corporal, and so we weren't. There were the rules. You couldn't. He couldn't. When he came to visit me in my camp, my hospital, he couldn't stay in my quarters, nor could I go where his were. My commanding officer got to know my brother. So when Dave would come to visit me, he stayed in the room where my commanding officer was. But anyway, I got to know, they got to know each other, and then Dave was shot down. Well, when that happened, I was a corporal, okay? And I knew that we didn't hear anything for a very long time, and I got a letter from a sister-in-law saying, at least missing in action isn't dead, missing in action. And that's all we had to go on, because we didn't have any idea where Dave was. Well, I knew he'd been shot down. That's a much longer story than we've got now, but I know that I knew he'd been shot down and he was a prisoner, but we had no other word than that. And I'm sitting in my office in the ward full of patients that I had, and the phone rang, and the voice on the phone said, "Corporal DuPre, please." Now, I had recently been promoted to sergeant, okay? Now, I want you to know I wore those, the statement is you wore your stripes kind of high. You want to make sure everybody saw them, okay? And here this, I wasn't Corporal DuPre, I was Sergeant DuPre, okay? So, and I let that person on the phone know. He said, "I want to talk to Corporal DuPre." And I said, "Well, this is Sergeant DuPre." And the voice said, "Well, damn it, this is Lieutenant DuPre." and I said, "I don't know who you are, but that's not very funny." And he said, "Pete, it's Duke." And that's what we called my brother, okay? And he said, "Pete, it's Duke." And then that brings my brother back again, okay? And so he was brought back. How's my time? Am I still all right on time?
10 minutes, yeah.
Okay. I'll tell the rest of this particular tale anyway. We got the word that my brother now was home. He was in a hospital outside of Oxford, okay? Now, as I said, he had stayed with my commanding officer when he visited. So I went to my commanding officer and I said, "Sir, my brother's been released. He's been found. And he's over in a hospital in Oxford." And the commanding officer reached for a pad and he wrote down my name and a few other things, and I looked at it and it said, "Due upon return," which meant that go and stay as long as you want. He handed it to me. He says, "Go stay with your brother. Do whatever you can, you know." So, and that just said, this guy's okay to go until he comes back. So I had that, and so Dave and I got together again. I went to see him. It was in the middle of the winter. I managed to get a train ride close to the hospital that he was in. He was in our hospitals, by the way. We were all Quonset huts. And I think most of you probably know what a Quonset hut is. But they were huge Quonset huts. They would hold 40 patients, and that's one of the things. What did you do in service? Well, I had charge of 40 patients. You know, but in any event, I got the okay from my off commander to go and visit my brother, and I spoke to the hospital where he was in Oxford and let them know that I was coming. And it was the middle of a snowy day, and I managed to get as close as I could, and then I had to walk the rest of the way, and I got into that Quonset hut office at about 4 in the morning, and I went in, and the nurses knew that I was coming, and the head nurse had me warm up a little bit, but then she said, "I will go and get your brother." And so I could hear the sound disappearing into the back of the Quonset hut, and I could hear a conversation. And so she came back and said he'd be right out. And I waited, and then I heard this sound. Now, I'm in an orthopedic ward. That's the area that I was working in. And I knew right away that my brother had a broken leg, or a broken foot, or something, and had a cast on, and it had a walking iron, which was a U-shaped thing that's molded into the bottom to protect that cast. So what I was hearing was, "Good foot, cane. My brother's got a broken something," you know. So, and it's almost as dramatic as any movie set you can imagine, because we were heated in those days by pot-bellied stoves, just plain sheet metal stoves loaded with firewood, and they would be glowing in the middle of the Quonset hut, and depending on the length of it, they'd have one or two, but that was where the heat was coming from. And I could hear my brother. The nurse came back and she said he'll be here shortly, and I knew, you know. And then around the edge of the pot-bellied stove, I saw my brother, and he just stopped cold. And excuse me if I tear up a little bit on this one, because we looked at each other, and he said, I didn't think I'd ever see you again, you know. And was it emotional? It was an emotional reunion. Okay. And that was our reunion. And I was able, when he was released by that column of Patton's men, there were 13 other officers like my brother, flyers from all over the world. And the only one that could be identified was my brother, because I was there to vouch for him. The morning after, he and I spent the night talking, and in the morning there were 2 guys in suits that came in. And they were from OSS, which was that Office of Strategic Services, which is now the FBI or whatever. And remind me before I leave one quick FBI story. Anyway, the following morning, they took Dave into one room and me into another room, and they quizzed us. What was your mother's maiden name? Where were you born? Where was she born? Brothers, sisters, and all of that, okay? And the idea was to coordinate the 2 stories. Well, they knew we both answered the same way, so they knew that I was okay, which meant that Dave was okay, and Dave had clearance. None of the other 13 officers had clearance, okay? And I was lucky, I was there. They were all over, they were trying to identify these other guys so they would have some freedom. But in the meantime, my brother was okay, and he had his guy swearing for it. That was me. So they decided that those of these other prisoners, and there were 13, I think, of them, okay, they assigned them to me. Because, you know, I was their guard, and all they wanted to go down to the PX and get an ice cream cone. Really. But they couldn't go unless there was somebody with them. So for that length of time that I was there until the Air Force came to pick my brother up, until that time, that excuse that I had was still inactive, okay? So I was allowed to be there, and if you can picture it, here these guys with various casts on in various shapes, and I would lead them. I'd like a sheep leading, or a dog leading the sheep, I guess, because these guys would trail along. They're all wounded, but they were recovering, you know, and they wanted to go down in the Quonset hut and have an ice cream or whatever, or a sandwich. The PX is where we would go, okay? And so that's what we did. We went there anyway, and when after this questionnaire, and then was there for 3 or 4 days like that. I could, if they wanted to get gum, if they wanted to just stretch their limbs, I was there. They could go with me, and then one by one, these other countries identified their people, and so they had the clearance. But for a few days, it was an absolutely fascinating situation. That here I had these, and what were they? They were all Air Force people. They were all officers, okay. And I'm a little old sergeant, you know. But I'm the China. There were some generals in there. There were 13. Yeah, they were flyboys, you know. And so that's a wartime story for you.